talk to you about boundaries. Now, boundaries can be a big scary word. If you're not familiar with the term, I would highly recommend you checking out this book by Townsend and Cloud. It's a great resource. It's going to talk to you about what boundaries are, what are healthy boundaries, what are unhealthy boundaries, all that good stuff. But today we're going to keep it really simple, and we're going to talk about the difference between boundaries and rules. Now, boundaries and rules can get kind of gray if you're not clear. So, rules, this is going to be really familiar to most of us, are externally motivated. A lot of times rules can be fear-based. For example, if you are driving in your car and you see that speed limit sign and it says 65, fear or an external motivation of getting a ticket is going to keep you from going over the speed limit. Most of you, haha. Or if you're younger and you're not driving yet, you might think about breaking curfew. You know, I don't want to break curfew because I am going to lose privileges. So I'm going to keep that rule in order to keep a good relationship with my mom and dad or whoever set the curfew in your life. But as you get older and we gain freedom, that can be kind of scary sometimes, because when you're 18 and you get sent off to college, you get all of this freedom and no one's over your shoulder checking to make sure that you keep the rules anymore. And so that's kind of what we want to talk about today, is the difference between living your life being rule-based or living your life with healthy boundaries, learning to live from the inside out versus being externally motivated your whole life. Like, that's not fun at all. So if we take a look at the life of Jesus, he had great boundaries. And I don't know if you've ever thought about this before, but Jesus was fully in control of his life. He was fully in command of his choices, who he was hanging out with. He knew how to say no to peer pressure. If you'll remember when he was in the wilderness and Satan came to tempt him and to tease him and to try to get him to go a different way, he was very clear with Satan. He was like, nope, this is not what we are doing. This is not what my Father is doing. Another example is he was open to having his mind changed. Do you remember when he was at the wedding and the host ran out of wine and his mom came and was like, hey, Jesus, they're out of wine. Do you think you could do that thing that you do? And he was like, no, not yet. My time hasn't come. But then we read in a little bit later in the passage that he changed his mind. He was open to doing something, different. And then another example is when Jesus's friend Lazarus passed away. I mean, we find out later that he actually raised Lazarus from the dead, but when he first gets to the funeral, his friends are like, Jesus, if you were here, he wouldn't have died. That's a ton of peer pressure to be under. Do you know what I'm saying? But because Jesus was fully connected to his Father, he was not confused about where he was going and the boundaries that he has set in his life. He was completely at peace in himself with what he was doing. And so in my own life, I figured out a long time ago that when I was super clear on who the most important person in my life that I was going to have a relationship with was the Lord, everything else kind of calmed down, and I was able to make choices or set boundaries in my life based on my relationship with the Lord versus being externally motivated by what a rule book told me to do or what was right, if that makes sense. And so I want to challenge you today to think about the difference between rules and boundaries. Maybe you've never even thought about that before. Maybe you've never given yourself freedom to live according to your internal compass and your relationship with God and what he is saying to you versus external motivation and rules. Have you considered what that would look like in your life? Have you tasted the freedom of being internally motivated versus externally motivated? Do you have boundaries in your life? What are they? Are you really clear on them, or do they change with who you're hanging out with, or the time of day, or the season of your life? And lastly, what motivates you to keep your boundaries? That's a really big deal. Once you figure out what is motivating you and spurring you on to keep your own boundaries in your life, everything else kind of calms down and you're not confused anymore. Once you know who you are and whose you are and where you're going, your boundaries become really clear in your life. So in the end, boundaries are something that you are going to have in your life that actually communicate what you value, and they're going to keep those things safe. I want you today to take a few moments and to talk to the Lord about boundaries. Be open to hear from him today, and I hope that you have a really fun time exploring this subject.